Got it.
Are there any technological wizards?
You wanna do Scott?
What?
What are you trying to do?
Get rid of got it.
Oh, you can't.
Telling
get
them I
rid of-
got it. No, this doesn't work. I got it.
Oh.
Oh. Mo got it. Oh, it's on your computer. That's what it is. Thank you. Okay. And today I want to dive into an episode that, is really interesting. It's a negotiation between the tribes of Reuben and Gad and Moshe about where they're going to settle. Now, I have to tell you, I have studied this 100 times before, or at least looked at it. I don't know about studied it. And this week, studying it, so much has opened up for me and became so much more interesting. I usually sort of glided over it in the past. So I'm excited to share with you what I've discovered. And we will begin from the beginning of the negotiation. In Numbers 32, I'm going to share my screen, and I think you have the link to the source sheet. Let me just make sure it's available just to look at. Second. Totally lost it. Give me one moment. Find it again. We've been having a lot of technical difficulties, but I think things are working at the moment, I'm hoping. So just to put things into context, as I set this up, the children of Israel have been wandering for 40 years. They can hear everything on Zoom. So let's just be quiet in the room. And people who want to say something, just raise your hands. And also the chat is open. So the children of Israel have been traveling through the wilderness for 40 years. One generation has died out, the next generation ready to go in. And this is what's happening at the end of the book of Numbers, right? So they're sort of on the precipice, sort of like, ready to enter the promised land. So here we go. Going to now share my screen. Looks like it worked. So I'm calling this navigating landscapes of grief, and hopefully that will become clear in full time. So first, I want us to look at the claim, just the claim, and then I want us to assess the claim before, Moshe even responds, okay? So starting from Umiknet Rav Hayal Uvnei Reuven Uvnei Gad Atzum Ma'ot V'yaru et Eretz Yazer ve'et Eretz Gil'ad v'hinei hamakom mikom mikneh. So the Reubenites and the Gadites owned cattle in very great numbers. So this is interesting. We're leading with animals, right? We're leading with sort of like, how are they going to support themselves, right? They've got cattle and that's how they make their living. And they've got a lot of cattle, right? Rav, great, Atsum, strong. Okay, and then noting that the lands of Jazer and Gilad were regions suitable for cattle, right? So again, cattle. Vayavo b'nei Gad u'b'nei Reuben v'yamru el Moshe ve'el Elazar haKohen ve'el Nesi'ei ha'edah le'mor. So second verse, the Gadite and the Reubenite leaders came to Moshe, Elazar, the priest, and the chieftains of the community and said, so this reminds us a little bit of the daughters of Tzlafchad, who we studied last year, right? They came, the daughters of Tzlafchad came before Moshe, Elazar, and the chieftains of the community, and then the whole nation, right? But they came with a claim, they came with a need, just as, these leaders are doing here. So what's their claim? What's their need? 3. Atarot, v'Givon, v'Yazer, v'Nimrah, v'Cheshbon, v'Elazar, Ushavam, Unevo, Uvaon. So they're starting to name places. Atarot, Divon, Jazer, Nimrah, Cheshbon, Ela, whatever that is in English, Sabam, Nevo and Ba'or. So at least one place name here should be ringing a bell. And that's Nevo, right? Where does Moshe die? Where does Moses die?
Har Nevo.
Har Nevo, Mount Nevo. 4. Verse 4. Haaretz asher hika Adonai lefnei adat Yisrael eretz miknehi v'la'avadecha mikneh. The land that Adonai has conquered for the community of Israel is cattle country, and your servants have cattle. So you haven't gotten the hint about cattle in verse 1. Mikneh. Here's more mikneh, right? They're very focused on cattle. Bayamru imatsan ochem benecha nitan et haaretz hazot avadecha la'achuzda al tavirenu et hayarden. It would be a favor to us. Actually, if we found favor in your eyes, yeah, if we found favor in your eyes, I don't know why it's translated this way. If this land were given to your servants as a holding, do not move us across the Jordan. So essentially, they don't want to enter the promised land. They want to settle on the other side of the border, right? The other side of the Jordan, right? In all these different places. And that's what their claim is. And they're doing it because it's a good place for cattle. Simple claim. Okay, so let's just take 2 minutes. I'm going to stop my share. If you don't know the rest of the story, and you don't know how Moshe is going to respond, how do you think Moshe would respond? Put in some quick thoughts in the chat, and if you have very quick things to say in the room, if you don't know the rest of the story, what's your assessment of this claim?
No,
Why not, Nikki?
because we were meant to go into the
There's
promise.
a promise here. We're 40 years. We're hearing about the promise. Even when there were still slaves in Egypt, they heard about the promise. No. What are you talking about? This is against everything we've been hearing from God and from Moses all these years. What are you talking about? There's a promise here. So now let's see what the quick statements are. Let's see. In the text, Ashachayim. In the text with Lot and the land value of stone. Interesting. Jay, I love this. Where did they get all that cattle? Where's it from? So is that part of the despoiling of the Egyptians?
No.
Doesn't name cattle.
No, it was when they.
Wendy knows, go ahead.
When they conquered other people.
Yeah.
When they conquered other people, they took the cattle.
Right.
Okay, spoils of war.
Lot
So
of
it's
war.
not despoilment of the Egyptians, spoils of war. We need cattle for the sacrifice. Okay, that's a nice reading. Kafschutz, giving them a sense of like, oh yeah, they're doing it because they want to offer cattle to God. Barbara, yeah, I was wondering about the cattle too. Okay, leave the cattle with a skeleton crew. I don't understand that, but I will later, I'm sure. From Egypt and recent plunder, a combo. Okay, good. All right, so the only one that really assessed the claim is Nikki, who said, no, right? No, this is against the promise. This is defying the promise, is not what we're here for. We have a purpose, we have a North Star, and that's going to the promised land. Okay, so let's see how Moshe responds, given what Nikki said. Okay, so share my screen. Here we go. Moshe says, Moshe is as angry as Nikki is, actually. Maybe angrier. But Nikki was very emphatic, okay? Okay, so verse 6. This is source 2. Vayomer Moshe l'bnei Gad u'bnei Reuven, ha'achechem ya'avo l'milchama va'atem teshvu po. Your brother's going to war and you're going to sit here? What are you kidding? You gotta be kidding, right? Now let's start to hear echoes. Achechem. This is another story, or this is a reading at least. I'm going to present a reading to you that I learned. I'll talk to you a little bit later about where I learned. You're gonna abandon your brothers. It's another story of abandon your brothers. Are you kidding? You're kidding. And not only that, there's also an echoing temptation. You're gonna settle here. Right? You're wandering people. You're gonna settle here. Remember who settled last? Where'd they settle? Who settled? Where's that word coming from? So Vayeshvu, right? Vayeshvu. Let's look to Genesis 37. going down for a minute. Aha. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv, right? Source 8. You don't have to look at it. It's like that word again, Vayeshev Yaakov. So that's the last time the family was together in the promised land. That's the last time. What happened that time?
The family.
It's a family, which means
Yeah, family.
tragedy,
Yeah.
right? Dysfunction, problems. Family doesn't always mean tragedy. I don't mean that, but
I think you said famine. You said
oh,
famine,
famine, oh,
So the
famine.
famine then.
Right.
which is a
famine.
cool, that's very interesting.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
never heard that
Family and
section.
famine, I never thought.
I never heard told of that before.
Remember our brothers and sisters and family on Zoom, they can't hear us if we talk all at once.
Oh.
So Ben, what do you want to say?
Oh, no, I just.
Why is
it's
famine
your
interesting?
fun.
Oh, famine and families.
You said family, you thought I said
Yes,
family, but I
yes,
said
okay,
famine.
got it,
And they went,
got it,
that's how they got down to Mitzrayim.
got it. And what did Stuart, did you want to say something?
I was saying I'd never made that connection between family and
Family,
family.
FAM, okay.
It's interesting.
It is interesting. Okay, so again, Moshe says, you're gonna, another abandonment in the wilderness? Are you kidding? Right, are you kidding? This is not happening of your brothers. Okay, so now let's look at verse 7, Zion. The Lama Tiniun at Lev b'nei Israel. Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that Adonai has given them? May avor el haaretz asher natan lahem Adonai. So, you know what's going to happen here? You're going to, just like the spies did all those years ago, right? When they said like, oh, we can't go into the promised land. If you don't go into the promised land, you're gonna have everybody, your brothers and sisters and your family lose heart about going to the promised land. But you should be leaders going to the promised land, and instead you're saying, staying here, we're gonna stop here. Okay. So, and Moshe uses the language here of God, right? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing the line that Adonai has given them? Just like Nikki was saying, right? Language of the promise. God gave this to you. What are you doing? So, verse 8. Ko asu avotechem b'shalchei otam mikadesh barnea l'rot et haaretz. And now we're going to the spies episode. That is what your father did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to survey the land. Why are you doing this all over again? This is history repeating itself. Again, what do you think you're doing here? V'ya'alu ad nachal eshkol v'yar'u et haaretz v'yaniu et lev b'nei Israel l'vilti vo el haaretz asher natan lahem Adonai. Okay, so verse 9, after going up to the Wadi Eshkol and surveying the land, they turned the minds of the Israelites from coming to the land that Adonai had given them. But it's interesting in the Hebrew, the viltivo, the not going in. Now, it struck me for the first time ever that Mount Nebo, Har Nebo, they have the language in it, the place where Moshe dies, of going in, vo, but not going in. The nun for negative and not going into the land. Right, and remember, Moshe is the person who can't go into the land. And he's saying, oh no, if you do this, no one's going to be able to go into the land. But perhaps there are also echoes here of his own greed of not going there. Right, l'viltiva, right, that painful state of not going into the land. V'yichar af Adonai bayom hahi, v'yishava lemor. Thereupon Adonai was incensed on that day, right? And swore, saying, Im yiru hanashim ha'olim miMitzrayim ben 20 shana v'mala et Adonai asher nashbati l'Abraham l'Yitzchak v'Yaakov ki lo mil'u acharai. None of the men from 20 years up who came out of Egypt shall see the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they did not remain loyal to me. So because of the spies episode, that whole generation will die out. Painful, except Bilti, Khaled ben Yefunah, Nizi, Yeshua ben Nun, Kimil'u, Acharei Adonai. none except Caleb, son of Yefunah, the Kenizite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they remain loyal to Adonai. But the Hebrews keep acharei Adonai. That's very interesting language. They fulfilled after, I'm not sure exactly what that means literally, but there's like a fullness perhaps of understanding God's project and going after God's project. That's how I'm reading that here. Vayichar Adonai Yisrael, and God got very angry at Israel and made them wander in the desert 40 years. Until the cessation of that whole generation doing evil in the eyes of God. Okay, so let's just pause here for a minute. So that happened all those years ago, and you're bringing it back now. So again, you've got Moshe saying, you've got to be kidding. Why are you doing that again? Right? And that's the frame Moshe is using to understand what they're doing now. But he's understanding the frame from the past, from 40 years ago, to understand what they're doing at this moment. Okay. So now, next verse, and now you, a breed of sinful fellows, have replaced your fathers to add still further to Adonai's wrath against Israel. The spot od al charon at Adonai el Yisrael. So now, there's this verb to add, or lahosif, to add twice in 14 and in 15. Let's look at 15 for a second. Ki teshuvun me'acharav yasat od v'anicho b'midbar v'shichatem v'chol ha'am hazeh. If you turn away from God, who then abandons them once more in the wilderness, you will bring calamity upon all this people. So this, to add still further and once more, recalls possibly Yosef. I don't know. That's the reading that I'm going to present to you, right? So there's all these overtones, not only of the spies, but that moment, that last moment, right? It's almost like bracketed, right? The family settled together, all the brothers together in Israel, right? In Eretz Canaan. And then there was calamity and abandonment of brothers and separation until this point, right? As they're about to go into the land, there has not been unity of this family since in the land, right? And now that there's about to be unity, two tribes are saying, no, we want to stay on this side. And Moshe is saying, oh my God, abandonment all over again. Brothers abandoning brothers in the wilderness all over again. So there's echoes of the spies, and then those echoes of that earlier moment. Okay, so I see there are hands, but I'm going to go one more text, and then I'll open things up. Okay, so now Reuben and Gad respond in a very interesting way, right? So Moshe is only hearing the past, and let's see. So they make a claim. Moshe only hears the past and treachery and destruction, and let's see what they say. Vayikshu elav. Now remember, Judah also approached Joseph, right? Remember that moment of approach. Vayigash, exactly. Vayikshu elav, vayomru, gidrot son nivneh l'niknenu po, va'arim l'tapenu. And they stepped up to him and said, we will build here sheep folds for our flocks and towns for our children. So now it's interesting because the language of son, sheep, not only nikneh, cattle, is introduced, and son again brings us back to Genesis 37 when the family was together and the brothers were shepherds. Okay, so they repeat what they want, right? But they go close. They don't go close. Now let's look at their arguments. Anachnu ne chalitz hushim. Nagid Israel, Ad asher im havionum el mikomam v'yashev tapenu ba'arei hamitzar v'bnei yoshvei haaretz. We will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites. In other words, we're gonna be the vanguard of the military. We're gonna fight first, right? We're gonna be up at front until we've established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified town because of the inhabitants of the land. In other words, they're saying, no, Moshe, we're not abandoning anybody. You're worried about abandonment? We're going, not only we're going to war, we're gonna fight up front. We're gonna fight for our brothers. Right, so they're trying to make here a distinction. They're making a claim, yeah, we're gonna stay on the other side of the Jordan. And yet they're saying, but it doesn't mean abandonment. It doesn't mean what you say, what you think it means. Don't only put the lens of the past on it. We're asking for something. And it means something different at this moment. Okay, so that's really interesting. And they're trying to assuage Moshe and his worst fears. They're not saying, no, this is what we need, sorry, Moshe. They're actually meeting him where he is with his fears and his concerns and literally his fear of abandonment. Right, which comes from the past, comes from the spies, and then even that generational memory of Yosef and the brothers back in Genesis. Okay, so now let's finish this passage and I'll open things up. 18, right? Lo nashuv el batenu ad itnachel b'nei Israel ish nachalato. Will not return our homes to the Israelites. Every one of them are in possession of their portion. So this responds to Nikki's claim. There's a promise. We're going to help fulfill their promise. This is not about going against the promise. Of course, it makes an argument for like American Jews. Like, are we supporting Israel? I know it's very complicated. We're not going to get into it, but are we like, by living in the diaspora, do you support Israel? Can you support like the national project or not? Big question, which we're not going to get into. Okay. Itam me'ever liyarden v'hala. Kiva'a nachalatenu elenu me'ever hayarden misracha. But we will not have a share with them in this territory beyond the Jordan. For we, it's interesting how they are insistent, have received our share on the east side of the Jordan. Right? They understand their heritage to be on the east side of the Jordan. Okay, so let me just review a little bit and I'll open things up. So we start off by seeing the word Nevo, right? The Nevo, which is the place where Moshe dies on the east side of the Jordan. Am I getting the east and the west right? Yeah, east side. Yeah, thank you. Nevo. So that's like, so we're heading towards Moshe's death, and they're making a claim, right? They want to settle there and all those little towns around there, and they're making a claim based on their cattle. Moshe gets incensed based on, again, to go back to what Nikki was saying. What do you mean? We've got a promise here. We have to go in the land. You're going to make everybody else lose hope because you're not willing to give it up. Right? You're going to abandon your brothers, your family. And they say, no, we're not abandoning anybody. We're going to fight at the vanguard. We're going to be responsible, for the promise more than other people. I say. Wait, one thing. So let's just talk about some of these elements that bring us back all the way, not only to the spies, but all the way to Genesis. Right? There's an issue of being left to die in the wilderness, but no. We're saying we're going to be responsible for our brothers. There's betrayal of brothers. Again, they say no. There's the issue of Vayigash approaching. There's taking responsibility for their brothers, the issue of shepherding and sown, and there's the little echoes of Yosef's name. Okay, so that's the reading I'm sharing with you today, and I'm going to now stop sharing my screen and call any hands in. Okay, Rob, and then we're going to go to the screen.
I never thought about it before you just talked about going backwards. And Reuven is the oldest brother. And what he's actually doing is he's selling his birthright, just like Asaph sold his birthright.
Interesting.
And he's entitled, I don't know, to a double portion, meaning because he was the oldest brother. So this, in that context, was a very, very bad thing. Just like, he's selling his...
In a sense, it's selling his birthright. Interesting.
Which I never thought of before.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to Amy and Beth.
I just want to say two things. First of all, in a long time ago, I was a agricultural agent in Florida. And I can tell you that between Lake Okeechobee and Orlando, there's 1 million acres of cattle. There are not 1 million available acres for cattle in Israel. When I lived in Israel for a year, I saw like maybe 10 cows. All of the beef that we ate in Israel was flown in from Argentina. It's not a cattle state. And the other thing I wanted to say really briefly is today is my 71st birthday. And, and I understand that on my birthday, I'm allowed to give everybody a birthday wish. Is this permissible to you? Okay, so I want to wish everybody who can hear me or everybody in the room and on the Zoom that all of their hopes and desires will be accomplished this year, that they will have amazingly good health, that everything good should come their way. And may the angels come in, take their little brooms and sweep out their hearts so that all of the anger, the disappointment, the revenge, all of the negative energy that's in your heart be swept out by these little angels. And there'll be an opening so that another set of angels will come in and fill your heart with joy so that every day you will have lots and lots of joy.
Amen.
Thank you. I can't hear you.
Can hear me?
Yeah, no.
Mo's our new, tell me your title.
Finance and Data Operations Manager.
No, Mo
Also
or
tech support.
Monica. What's your last name?
Lebrecht.
Lebrecht is our new finance and data operator.
Yes.
Yeah, mazel tov. And we're thrilled to have Mo on board. Mo also seems like a technical genius, which I'm very thrilled about. So just patience as Mo rearranges. Are we plugging in your, okay.
But you should still be able to talk. So
Oh, can people hear me? Okay, great. So I'm going to call on Beth.
Shabbat Shalom.
Oh, well, hold on one second. We can't hear you in the room. Uh-oh. Wait, what'd you say, Ben?
Shabbat Shalom. And happy birthday, Amy.
Oh, okay.
What I wanted to share, it's apparent to me that the Reubenites and the Gadites are really superb at animal husbandry. And that's evidenced by the fact that they have so many cattle. They've been very successful at raising cattle. And they can see what sort of landscape is going to be beneficial for their animals. And so that is why they want to stay on the wrong side of the Jordan. And I also think it's fascinating that here we are, we're right on the precipice of entering the promised land, and we already have a diaspora community. We haven't even gone in yet, and we have a diaspora community. And I think that telegraphs what has amounted to, at least to the present day, the destiny of our people. We are both Eretz Israel and we are diaspora. And I think it's both okay. Debarti.
We can't hear you.
I'm unmuted. No, I'm not. No?
There's an echo.
Can't hear you, Rabbi.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Well, it's not coming through the
I
computer.
think the
Oh, hear you.
volume needs to be turned off on one of the devices, so everyone can hear it.
It's so bad.
Yes, connected.
The RT show.
Hello, can you hear me now? Yes? Great, okay, so. Okay, so it's not the issue of, following on Beth's point of, diaspora or not, ultimately is are we unified in purpose? Okay, let's continue. Was there other hands? Other hands? No? Yeah, Stuart.
Well, I have a question. They want to stay on.
Hooray, Monica, Asher Chaim says.
Uh,
Thank you, Mo.
They're saying they want to stay on land that God didn't give to.
Correct. Not part of the promise.
It's not part of.
Not part of the package.
And are there already
package
people,
of the
are there already people living on that land? Is it just empty land that they're saying? we want this?
I don't know.
This is like a little bit asking for more than.
Yeah,
A
asking
lot
for
more.
certainly more and different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that doesn't sit so well with me at the moment. There
You
are
don't
other
like
people, there are other people living there.
Well,
I'm
there
sure.
are also other people living in the promised land that they slaughtered.
I know.
So that doesn't sit well, neither does that.
Yeah, but God at least has said, well, this is the land I'm giving you. You
I
know,
see.
God has told us.
I see.
Now they're saying we want more. And that's problematic, it seems.
Okay. Jay.
I was feeling a bit sheepish about making this comment, but it's actually building exactly on what Amy and Beth were talking about. In fact, I had the word husbandry written down. Before we go on to the echoes and all that, I think we need to honor the pshat with it's almost like bli kemach ein Torah. I mean, it's on one, there's a concern with animal husbandry, and the response is also very practical. How are we going to conquer the land without you guys? So I think we need to honor a lot of the shot practicality of what it takes to make a life, including solidarity.
Right. So I agree with you, Jay. Like, this is real. We need to make a living. We need to sustain ourselves. And can we do that and sort of be unified in a promise and in a project and an aspiration at the same time? Okay, so let's see what happens. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Host, can you help me?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so we are up to here. So now let's see what Moshe, so again, so they make a claim, Moshe only hears the past. They clarify saying, no, Moshe, we're part of your project. It's okay. We want to live here and we're going to fight in the vanguard or at the vanguard. Let's see what Moshe says. Okay, Asher Chaim, do you feel like reading? My voice is getting
Thank you. Vayomer alehem Moshe, im ta'asun et hadavar hazeh, im tehalsu lifnei Adonai lamilchama. Moshe said to them, without asking God, if you will do this thing, if you will be the vanguard before Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh for war, Ve'avar lachem kol halus et hayarden lifnei Adonai ad horisho et oevav mipanav. And every shock fighter among you crosses the Jordan in advance of Yud He Vav He until you dispossess the enemy, hit God's enemies from before God. V'nichbesha haaretz lifnei Adonai, v'achar tashuvu, v'hitem naqiyim me'Adonai u'miYisrael. V'haita haaretz hazot lachem la'chuzah lifnei Adonai. And the land be conquered before Yud He Vav He, and afterwards you will return, and you will be free, clear, and innocent from Yud He Vav He and from Israel, and this land will be for you as a holding in the presence of Yud He Vav He.
Okay, so let me stop just for a minute. So what's really interesting is at the end of the book of Numbers, and I said this at the beginning, there's a series of claims. There's the daughters of Slavchad, then there's this claim right here, and then there's the sons of Menashe, right? At further on at the end of towards the end of the book. So there's a series of claims, and there's a series of comings to decisions on Moshe's part, sometimes with the help of God, or as Asher Chaim pointed out here, not with the help of God. Moshe made this decision. But it's to me, it's the unfolding of sort of halakha and the give and take, like the human need and the responding from leadership and the responding from God, right? And which makes sort of opens up a path to Deuteronomy, which is all in the human voice. And further on, the development of oral law. So that's interesting. The other thing is Moshe almost expands things here when he says, you will have a holding, right? La'achuzah before God. I think Moshe, what I'm hearing here, I don't know if other people hear too, almost like Moshe is expanding the promise and saying, you're gonna live on the other side of the Jordan, but that, in a sense, is gonna be the heritage, the divine, part of the divine heritage, right? So it's almost like Moshe is expanding the narrative so that they're gonna be taking part in the promise alongside their brothers. Okay, continue, Asher Chaim. Okay, achuzah is not the same as nachala. So why don't you expand on that and then go forward? It's a holding, not an inheritance. That's what you're saying. Okay, I got it.
V'im lo ta'asu chen, v'hinei hakatem l'Adonai, ud'u hatatchem asher timsa etchem. But if you do not do thus, behold, you have sinned before Yud He Vav He. Be aware of your sin, which will catch up with you. B'nu lachem arim lekapchem ugderot lesonchem v'hayosem mipechem ta'asu. Build for yourselves cities for your young'uns, and pens and sheepfolds for your flocks. As the words that come out of your mouth, thus shall you do. At least the kids come first in this recension. Vayomer b'nei Gad u'bnei Reuven el Moshe lemor, avadecha ya'asu ka'asher Adoni misaveh. The children of God and the children of Reuven said to Moshe, quote, your servants will do as our master commands. Apenu nashenu miknenu v'chol behemtenu yusham be'arei hagilad. Our children, our wives, our cattle, our critters will all be over there in the cities of Gilad. V'avadecha ya'avru kol halus sava lifnei Adonai lemilchama asher Adoni dover. And your humble servants will cross over as halus sava, those recruited for war before Yud He Vav He, as our master speaks or orders. Okay, fabulous. So Moshe, I'm going to do one more passage in a minute, and then we'll get to some comments. So what Moshe does is interesting. I mean, the bottom line is Moshe hears them, right? So first, Moshe didn't hear them because Moshe associated what they said with what the past generation did, and thought that it would destroy the whole project. Then they make their clarification, and then Moshe clearly hears them and says, okay, if you go out and fight at the vanguard, you can have this, and you can do this. So it's a beautiful example of give and take and negotiation. Okay, let's do one more Asher Chaim.
one more passage and we'll open things up. So let's now look at how Moshe presents this agreement to the others.
ויסב להם משה את אלעזר הכהן ואת יהושע בן נון ואת ראשי אבות המלכות לבני ישראל. Moshe commanded towards Elazar Kohen and Yehoshua son of Nun and the heads of the tribal families of the Israelites. Vayomer Moshe alehem im ya'avru b'nei Gad u'b'nei Reuven itchem et hayarden kol halus lamilchama lifnei Adonai v'nichbesha haaretz lifneichem untatem lahem et eretz hagilad la'achuzah. Moshe said to them, if the children of God and the children of Reuven cross over the Jordan with you as those shock fighters for war before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and the land is conquered before you, then you shall grant them the land of the Gilad as their holding. V'im lo ya'avru halusim itchem v'nohazu betochechem be'eretz Kena'an. But if they do not cross over as shock troops, then they will receive landholdings in the land of Canaan. Vaya'anu b'nei Gad u'b'nei Reuven lemor, eight asher diber Adonai el avadecha ken na'aseh. The descendants of Gad and Reuven said, that which Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has spoken concerning your servants, so shall we do. Nahnu na'avor halusim lifnei Adonai eretz Kena'an ve'itanu ahuzat nahalatenu me'ever layarden. We will cross over as shock troops before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh into the land of Canaan, and with us the holding of what we inherit will be across the Jordan. Vayeten lahem Moshe livnei Gad.
Chaim, it's Achuzah and Nachala now.
Achuzat nachalatenu. Yeah.
To your earlier point.
Vayeten lahem Moshe livnei Gad v'livnei Reuven v'lahasi shevet Menashe ben Yosef et mamlechet Sihon melech ha'Emori v'et mamlechet Og melech Bashan ha'aretz le'areha b'gvulot arei ha'aretz saviv. Moshe granted to the children of God and the children of Reuven and half the tribe of Menashe son of Joseph the former kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the former kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the land with its various cities and territories of their surrounding cities.
Wait a second, half tribe of Menashe? Did they ask for anything? What are they doing here? Right? It's God, it's Reuven. They asked for something, they got something, and suddenly Moshe throws in half tribe of Menashe. So where does that leave us? Half tribe of Menashe is on one side of the Jordan, half tribe of the Menashe is on the other side. Let's consider what that means. So let's look at Menashe. So here's the understanding that the Torah offers about what Menashe means. Back in Genesis, Vayikra Yosef et Shem Bechor Menashe. Joseph named the firstborn Menashe, meaning Ki nashani Elohim et kol amali et kol beit avi. God has made me forget completely my hardship and my parental home. So first, let's see that Menashe ben Yosef, right? The name of Yosef is literally brought into this whole thing, right? So I showed you before overtones and hints, but now here we have Yosef. Now let's think about what's going on. If half the tribe of Menashe is on one side and half the tribe of Menashe is on the other, that's going to be the tribe then that links Gad and Reuven on one side and the rest of the brothers on the other side. But so now there's a link that's separated by the Jordan through Menashe, through Joseph's son. Like that's pretty amazing. And Menashe is the one that says, that represents forgetting And in the beginning, it's interesting, like when should we forget, when should we remember? In the beginning, Moshe remembered too much the past and couldn't hear the present, right? But then if you remember what happened to the brothers and the family and their division, and you can hear that God and Reuben is saying like, no, we don't want to abandon our brothers. We want to be with our brothers, like hear the claim in the moment. And Moshe was able to do that because I think God and Reuben addressed Moshe's fears, right? So ultimately then, he throws in Menashe as a kind of unifying tribe between those tribes on one side of the Jordan and the two tribes on the other side of the Jordan. Okay, only half the tribe of Menashe. Okay, Nikki, did you have something before?
I don't know if I should bring this up, but in all this,
I'm gonna stop my shift, yeah.
dividing up of the land,
Yeah,
there is no attention to the conquest of the peoples that are occupying the land.
that is a huge issue and not our topic for today. I'm sorry.
I know, but can we take it up at some point?
Take it up at some point. I sent you an article about your question last week.
Oh, okay, thank you.
By email. Okay, so, yes, Lori.
Well, it comes back to that whole notion of unity and duality.
Unity and duality, and Neil just put in the chat, healing of splits.
Right, that's exactly what I'm
Beautiful.
saying.
Yeah,
The return is the repair of the healing of the split. Because that's when we go
the
deeper into
return
God.
where?
Well, between two people, between any moment of conflict, it's the repair between mother and infant. It's the repair where the relationship with Hashem
Coming
is
back
deeper.
together.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, anyone
repair.
on Zoom or in the room would like to say something? Asher Chaim, do you have your hand up? Great. And then Wendy.
Okay, so in the lineage of Tzlofchad, it appears that Tzlofchad's family is going to end up on the wrong side of the river. Just pointing that out to throw a spanner in the works.
So how does that relate? What do you think that means?
These wonderful Zionist women were so eager to claim the inheritance inside the land, but are they ending up getting Ahuzah instead of promised land? Are they going to be stranded in the Gilad with Machir's family?
But God and Reuben then combine the idea of Ahuzah and Nachalah, holding an inheritance. So I don't know. You're right, it becomes more complicated. Yeah.
I think the case of what happens with the tribe of Menashe is fascinating. It's as if the tribe has got a dual identity, the way they're straddling the Jordan, one part on one side and one part on the other side. And it's, you can go in so many places metaphorically with this. You can say Eretz Israel and diaspora, you can say conscious and unconscious. There's just so many different ways of interpreting this split or this dual identity. And I think it's really fascinating. And I also think it's great that it does suddenly show up in Moshe's speech. He's been, at first he starts out all PO'd at the Reubenites and the Gadites, and then they present their case to him, and now he's reconciling himself with it. And then he takes it a step further on his own volition as a result of this interaction with them. And
yes,
I think that's pretty great.
Yes. So first he thinks any compromise will be totally destructive of the project. And then he compromises and adds something in as I think an element, as Laura was saying, of repair. So, and I think the question is, like, I almost named this session, like, when does the real destroy the ideal? Or when is the real sort of, it always is, the only way forward, right? The only way forward, but then how do we reconcile it with the ideal? Like, how do we not lose the ideal in the face of the real? And God and Reuben say, no, like, we're on board with this sort of ideal in the sense that we're unified, we're like in the project, we're gonna fight. And the Moshe says, okay, so let's make the real also reflect the ideal by throwing in Menashe. Elliot.
So, we've talked about how this is, a moment of solidarity and unity, but it's also a time of division. He's dividing the tribe of Manasseh. And so what are we to make of that?
Well, but he's dividing it in a way so that they kind of, to me, bridge.
Yeah,
bridge what's separate on this side and what's separate on this side. So so what do we make of that?
Yeah, because how do they feel about that?
I don't know. How do they feel about that? We don't know how they feel about that.
Okay.
That's a really good question. No idea.
Okay.
Okay, Wendy, Joe, Ben.
The tribes of God and Reuben actually show a lack of faith. Like, how do they know that there's not going to be a place for their cattle in the land itself?
Beth said, or someone said, Amy said, no, there's not much cattle.
No, I know. I know. I traveled along the Jordan River, and when you go along the Jordan River in Israel, all you see are the cows. And that's where they were. But how did those two tribes not know that there was not a place for their cattle internal to the land of Israel?
That's a good question.
They didn't know that. They said like, this place looks good. Okay, we're going to stay. We're not going to take our. They had a lack of faith, a lack of emunah, that God was going to provide for them some place where they could have their cattle. And also, there's no mention of the fact that the tribe of Manasseh had cattle. Like, why would they want to be there if they didn't have cattle?
Well, cattle didn't seem to be the issue with Manasseh.
Or sheep, or animals of sorts. And then like I had reiterated from last week, like part of this is due to the fact that Reuben feels slighted because that tribe feels slighted because they were passed over to be the Behor, to be the inheritor over Joseph. And so they kind of like want to distance themselves. They don't want to be they don't want to be sloppy seconds internal to Eretz
So
Yisrael.
Reuben's concerned with Reuben's needs because they were passed over. So I would say that in terms of your earlier comment about losing faith, I wouldn't say that they don't have faith. I would say that their faith is mediated by their real needs for sustainability.
And they weren't willing to take a chance that their needs wouldn't be met.
And they weren't willing to take a chance that their needs wouldn't be met. I think, I like your reading. It's a good reading. Okay, Joe and then Ben.
I also want to point out that we're in the middle of the 3 weeks. Today's Shabbos Mevarchim for the 9 days.
Okay.
And we're talking about rupture and repair. There's nothing more in this whole thing. It gives us this diaspora versus having a temple versus not having a temple. It's like, it's the same time period.
That's really powerful. So this is a time where, we grieve some of our ideals and we grieve destruction and we grieve our aspirations not being realized in the ways that we wish they would be. Okay, Ben.
Yeah, I want to build on that. So I'm wondering about whether this whole setup is a little bit of a sort of precursor of how will we teach this people how to live both in and outside the land? For millennia, this has been our story of coming and going and being it's like really true. It's not true about very many peoples. There aren't very many who have survived being in and leaving and coming back and having to go again. And I was thinking specifically about so there are these like really weird laws here, really interesting laws, which I'm not 100% sure how to connect in here, but that are set up in the same chapters around this idea that you need cities of refuge for people who accidentally kill someone.
Right.
And basically the idea is that they have to give the accidental murderer a place to run to be safe, so that basically to avoid sort of the blood, like a blood feud between families, which has all this resonance with like, what are we doing with our brothers? And what about when our brothers are like our in-laws, but our ancestral connections are all. And the reality is that the refuge cities, there are three inside, there's three inside the land and three set up over on the other side of the river. Feels very connected to, it might even be because of this, that God says, by the way, you're gonna have to set up these cities permanently on the other side of the river. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because, well, two reasons. One is that in addition to the Menashe story, so those cities of refuge are actually the land that's supposed to be given to the Levites. That's where all the Levites live on both sides of the river. That's their place. So it's really impacting the priestly class. They have to respond and totally change and split in response to this change. And when we think about Tisha B'Av and the destruction of the temple, like the way I always think about it is that there's this framing, like the exile makes it impossible for us to practice Judaism the way that we did when we had the temple. But there's already a precedent here for Levi'im, for the priestly class to have to be operating outside the land. And I'm just so curious, like, what does that do to observance of certain laws, which we know only apply inside the land? And like, what are these tribes actually going to have, these sort of like two and then two halves of tribes, let's say, having to actually do and live outside the land for like really before all these questions of exile and destruction come into play.
Right. Wow.
Which you could also trace back to like infighting. Like when we actually aren't able to be there for each other, that's when we get kicked out.
Right. So Ben, I love that you're amplifying the complexity of the realization of the promise.
Yeah.
And I think that I think what this is about, or one way we can sum it up is, as soon as the promise is realized, there's disappointment, complexity, negotiation. Like it doesn't look like what we imagined it. You know, it's sort of like you go on your honeymoon and you establish a life. It's difficult, right? It's like you're not at that peak moment anymore. You're actually making things real. And reality is not the ideal, just not. The other thing that's resonating for me throughout this whole thing is that here they're expressing unity of purpose. Now the Jewish people, they don't have unity of purpose. Like that's part of what we're grieving, right? All that fragmentation, all that polarization, right? God knows even in this, in this room, between the screen and who we are in this room, it's not, unity of purpose or unity of vision for how the people of Israel should go forward. Okay, anyone else in the room want to speak? Because I have one more thing before we end. Okay, so what's interesting is that this is very much a text of the 3 weeks, right? In terms of separation and unity, ideal and reality, disappointment and grief. So now we're going to go to grief. So look at Nevo. It's so interesting, the placement of the place of Moshe's death in this narrative, right? So Moshe dies, as we know, before the people of Israel crossed the Jordan, but now Moshe is not separated from where his people settle, because it's where God, Reuben, and half the tribe of Menashe settle, right? So look at verse 37. Reuben, Banu, et Cheshbon, ve'et El Ayla, ve'et Kiryat Chaim. So the Reubenites built this and this. Ve'et and Nevo. Ve'et Baal Ma'on. Actually, I'm not going to go through the rest of the verse because we don't need to. But that's one of the places one of the towns that the Reubenites build and settle, right? The place where Moshe dies, right? So now Moshe's not dying in a place that is different and distinct from the place where his people settle ultimately.
And he's a Levite.
So, and then we look at the death of Moshe in Har Nevo, Mount Nevo. Le'al Moshe me'arvot Moab el Har Nevo. Rosh HaPisgah asher al Panei Yerecho. Vayarehu Adonai el kol haaretz et hagil ad Jordan. And Moses went up from the steps of Moab to Mount Nevo, to the summit of Pisgah opposite Jericho. And Adonai showed him the whole land, Gilad, as far as God. So it's such a poignant moment, right? Because Moshe is separate from the promised land, but standing with his people, where his people are settling. It's such a moment of grief and poignancy, and yet Moshe can see the promised land, that promise that he's been holding all these years, with its attendant sort of griefs and disappointments at this moment. And here we are in this moment, right? This moment between the straits, right? The 3 weeks heading up to Tisha B'Av, and today we're heralding the coming of the month of Av, right? And it's 9 days of sadness and grief and ultimate fasting. There was one more thing I wanted to say. Let me stop my share. So I think there's so much here in terms of, we have Nevo right at the beginning of the story, right? The place where Moshe ultimately dies. And one can imagine that when he hears something from God and Reuben, he hears destruction, he hears grief, he hears we're not going to be able to go into the land. Right? He hears that not only for himself, but for everybody, because he's seeing it through the prism of his own grief. He's hearing what they say now through the prism of the past. And then we also hear the echoes of Genesis and that grief and that rupture, that family rupture. But it's so moving to me that when God and Reuven really hear what's underlying Moshe's grief and anger, they can say, no, Moshe, we're not abandoning brothers here, right? We're going to be with them. We just need this for ourselves. This is our need, and this is our claim, and Moshe can hear them. So I want to bless us all in this time of grief, not only this time of national grief and commemoration, but this time of planetary grief as well, in the wake of a pandemic and so much climate crisis that people I know and love are suffering from directly at this moment. People who live in Vermont, people, who live upstate, that we hold somehow, that we're still able to hear promise through the prism of reality, and maybe, God, what am I trying to say right now? I guess I'm trying to wish us the capacity to hear hope and promise even at this moment of grief, and negotiate the reality of the present in light of that. I hope that made sense, and I wish you all Shabbat Shalom. And I hope that join us in services. We're going to do some Torah study at the beginning of the parsha later on in services. I have a conversation about wandering a little bit later. Shabbat Shalom.